So you're curious about the pelvic floor, but every time you tune into this very intimate area, there's only radio silence. Well, there's a reason for this numbness. Stay tuned because in this episode, I'm going to share with you somatic movement tools to embody pelvic floor sensual pleasure. My name is Candia Raquel. I am a Mexican sensualist, scientist, and artist that could only eat tacos for the rest of her life. And you are at the Sensual Sessions Podcast, the place to explore sensing pleasure through your senses and expressing it through movement in a way that it's free from inhibition and full of your own splendor. So, the pelvic floor, well, it's not just like any other body part, like the neck or the nose or the ears. There's a lot of taboo around the pelvic floor, whether it's religious or cultural. And along that taboo, there's huge misinformation, even in the medical realm. So, just a story to frame this context is how once upon a time, the mother of my friend Daniel knocked on his door because she thought he was breaking the wall with a piece of furniture. And when she opened the door, she found my friend Daniel stunned, standing naked, covering himself with a pillow. And apparently, there was no one there except from him in the room until the mother opened the closet and found Jonathan, Daniel's boyfriend. And it was a terrible drama. She kicked them both out of her house, and I was Daniel's neighbor. I lived like two buildings far from him. We were both 17 years old, but I was already independent. I left for college and I invited him over, both of them, to my flat and organized a huge party that I am very proud of, inviting all my gay friends from the dance world and just to celebrate him for coming out of the closet quite literally. And he stayed at my place for a few weeks, sleeping on my living room until he found his way in the world as a proud, young, gay man. And I feel this is a very descriptive story on how a huge idea about the pelvic floor and that society has can have a big impact on your life direction. In this case, being like the mother's disapproval on what his son did in regards with his pelvic floor. And here's where we need to make a hard stop and say, like, what I do with my pelvic floor is my decision. No one else should have a say in regards to your pelvic floor. And yeah, it can be challenging. This is a story about a young man, but for women is equally, if not historically, even more challenging. What is at play, at risk in regards to our own pelvic floor, just physiologically, and how your decisions around it like can get very serious, and whether there was any kind of pleasure or there wasn't. So all of this cultural context can get in the way to just feeling free to get curious and be aware of what's going on in that bodily area. But I really believe that it's an important aspect as a mature adult to reclaim full ownership of the totality of your flesh, your body, because you are your body, and assume your authority upon yourself and reclaim your pleasure, because health itself, being healthy, is pleasurable, and that's the essence of life. So at the heart of this episode is the invitation for you to reclaim your sovereignty on your body, especially in the area of the pelvic floor, and make your own choices as a mature adult, and perhaps see if you can let yourself live your fullest splendor, embodying your sensuality. And for that, I want to share a couple somatic movement tools, actually three tools. But first, let's dive deeper into the problem of numbness or lack of sensitivity in the pelvic floor. And it can be uh, for either two reasons. A subjective one, meaning there's a taboo, an emotional thing, a echo of a distasteful bad experience. So it's about thoughts or emotions. That's one side of the problem, subjective. And the other can be an objective problem, meaning the pelvic floor is plain numb, meaning your nervous system is not quite used to to sensing, because you're not used to paying attention to your pelvic floor. So it's kind of use it or lose it. Like we we forget we forget the sensations of the body that we are not regularly aware of. And Thomas Hanna coined a term for this, which is amnesia, sensory motor amnesia, meaning you don't have sensations, therefore you cannot move this body part or any other part. Could be like the armpit. And the solution, of course, is awareness and discernment, meaning choosing. Like once you are aware of something, you cannot be indifferent. So awareness as realizing what's going on and deciding yes or no. If you don't know, that counts as a no. So applying awareness um, to the subjective problem sums up to working on self-consent. An awareness on the objective aspect of the pelvic floor is getting to know pelvic floor anatomy. So let's begin with the subjective solution, which is self-consent. And there are two types of self-consent. One is the conscious, and the other is the unconscious. Conscious self-consent is through your mind, your discursive thinking, and your unconscious self-consent happens through the sensations of your body, of either pleasure or pain that you can therefore be aware of. So conscious self-consent of your mind happens by assessing the situation around you and inside you and deciding if it's safe, yes or no. So the self-consent at the mind level needs to make sense, rational sense. Like it's not a good idea to like get naked in the subway of Berlin and explore your pelvic floor. Like it doesn't make sense. Okay, it's not like the safest context to do so. And perhaps in the privacy of your bedroom, in with the heater on, after a warm bath and having some cherries on the bedside table. Well, that's a context that makes rational sense, okay? Now, what about the other kind of self consent that is unconscious? This has to do with the aspect of yourself that is your flesh. And the way that you can know if it's a yes or a no is if you are sensing pleasure in your body, if you're okay, or you are kind of actually in pain or having kind of discomfort or tension. That's a no. So again, you can be in the worst rational context in in the subway of Berlin, feeling pretty willing and able at a bodily level, but you don't have but but the other level of consent says no. So it doesn't match, so it's a no. Or on the other scene that you are in your bedroom and with a candlelight and everything is warm and cozy and sensuous, but your body is kind of tight and gripping and you're experiencing some tension and discomfort, then that's a no. So your body has to say yes and your mind has to say yes in order for you to have a full yes to go on and explore your pelvic floor and explore its pleasure. And it's very important that every time you want to do anything that has to do with sensuality, you run this filter of self-consent. Like, ask yourself if you are really giving yourself permission to do what you want to do, what you're curious about. And this, as a practice, restores your own trust in yourself, meaning you restore the trust in your flesh, in you, in the way that you will make yourself know at an unconscious level that is safe to do what you are gonna do because you're taking care of yourself as a mature adult that is consenting or not consenting when it's not a good time. So it's key. It has to make sense at a rational level and it has to be sensitively pleasurable at an unconscious level. So it has to make sense and it has to be sensual. Okay? And you may say, okay, well, how do I practice this? By getting curious about your everyday physical sensations surrounding the pelvic floor. For example, going to the bathroom. You go to the bathroom every day, and what goes out through the pelvic floor, I mean, it's water or solid stuff from either front or back of the pelvic floor. So there you can practice self-consent in wondering if you are okay with experiencing the pleasure in your pelvic floor by simply going to the bathroom. Or you can just say, no, I don't want to experience it. And you can just go to the bathroom regularly without paying attention to your pelvic floor. But if you pay attention, that's a great place to clean your mind from taboos around the pelvic floor, around excretion, around urination, around over cleanliness, about all this prudishness culture, and also become more curious about the biological facts of your pelvic floor that has to do with odors, its natural odors, and then you can get even more curious around the shape of your own pelvic floor with a mirror. And this is a practice of being like more realistic and practical. And almost like a dog or a cat, like their pelvic floor is just a pelvic floor, the same as your armpit is just an armpit, or I don't know, a side of your rib cage is just like another bodily area. So we want to make the same with the pelvic floor, a taboo free anatomical area that we explore always through self consent, making sure that we are really looking forward to it at every level. And the second tool that is about how to objectively embody the pleasure of your pelvic floor has to do with being a little bit more informed about the pelvic floor, which is, in short, understanding that the pelvic floor is not alone, standing by itself, orbiting in the galaxy. On the contrary, the pelvic floor is part of the core system in your body that surrounds your viscera and contains them. So you can imagine this container as a bag, as a backpack. So you have a backpack inside your body, and inside the backpack, you have your viscera, your organs. You have the intestines, the stomach, the gallbladder, the liver, the kidneys, the urethra, all that digestive combo. And the canvas, the material of the backpack itself, it's made of a very special kind of muscles that have stabilizing fibers. And the surrounding fabric of the backpack, it's made of the transversus abdominis. The top of the backpack is made of the primal muscle of respiration, which is the diaphragm. The straps of the backpack, which connects all of this to the spine, is the psoas major muscle and the multifidae. And the base of the backpack that sustains all that's inside of it, meaning all the organs and viscera, is the pelvic floor. So it's not just another set of muscles, and therefore it should never be worked in an isolation. An example of isolating the pelvic floor muscles is trying to contract them arbitrarily at a given count. For example, the Kegels that say like contract 1, 2, 3, 4. Now relax. Now slower 1, 2, whatever. Because that only addresses the pelvic floor in isolation. And if you already have a certain kind of struggle with the pelvic floor, doing this Kegel approach will only further the disconnection from the pelvic floor from the system, and can be so detrimental, especially in cases of urinary incontinence, prolapse, uh, recovery after childbirth, etc. So this is like the basic anatomical understanding that you need to have about the pelvic floor is that you cannot work it in isolation. You have to work it in the context of the core system because pelvic floor is its base. And how do we do that? Well, by understanding what the core system does. What does the core system does? It supports breathing. And if you are aware that you breathe 22,000 times a day, then you will realize like, oh, wow, I am already using my pelvic floor 22,000 times a day. So what's the better way to support the pelvic floor? Well, by improving your breathing pattern, but not by tackling it directly through breath work or something prescriptive and squared like the Kegels themselves, because that's a framework foreign to the natural way of the pelvic floor and the core system. Because breathing happens, you can breathe consciously on command, but the strongest modus operandi of your own breathing is unconscious because it's a function run by your autonomic nervous system, meaning it runs on autopilot. Even if you're not aware of it, you just breathe. So we have to work in sync, like you have to put your awareness to support the unconscious working of the core system and therefore the pelvic floor. And how do we do that? Well, first off, by not interfering with what's already working well, like don't make it worse. And how do you do this? How can you support your breathing pattern? You do this by just noticing the sensations of your ebb and flow of respiration. Just being aware of the movement and the sensations activates the nervous system at every level, conscious and unconscious. And this activation supports self organization at an unconscious, autonomic level. And here's the science behind this. There's this Weber-Fechner law that says that the less the stimuli you have, you apply in your body, the greater the sensitivity you will have. So it's easier to notice the sensation of a feather barely touching your cheek than if you put a huge pressure in your cheek. Intensity is numbing, and nuance is resensitizing, which is what we want. So we want to resensitize our whole self, especially the pelvic floor, via becoming aware of the bare minimum that you can sense in the pelvic floor every time you breathe. So we are working in layers. So first off, we created the context of safety via our conscious discernment and bodily listening for full self-consent. We cleaned ourselves of taboos, and we are already getting curious about what's going on with the pelvic floor every time we go to the bathroom. So here, how we can get more in touch with our pelvic floor anatomy is by listening the nuanced sensations of the pelvic floor every time you breathe. So could be like with a timer, just 2 minutes or 5 minutes. If you have a meditation practice of half an hour, well, wonderful. Just or when you're driving and you are on a stop, like just get curious about what sensation can you get in the pelvic floor. And perhaps you won't notice much in the beginning because of numbness, because of this sensory motor amnesia that we call in somatic movement. But little by little, as you rekindle yourself with this often neglected and abandoned bodily area, sensations will come. Maybe even like streaming, like, wow, I I never imagined I could like welcome all of this pleasure, and then practice on increasing your capacity of how much pleasure can you take. Because if we go back to science, to physiology, we will see that the pelvic floor is a highly innervated area of our body, meaning there is a huge amount of nervous endings to sense, to perceive. Almost, I don't know, like our hands are extremely sensitive. Well, the pelvic floor is as well. And this 2026 is a year to celebrate that finally the full neural anatomy of the female organ of pleasure, which is the clitoris, have been fully mapped. And it's about 14,000 nerve endings. So that's just like this specific organ in the pelvic floor. But other like besides our sexual organs, we have all the the nerve endings of the sphincters of the urethra and the anus, and all of that enteric nervous system also is involved there. And then we have the nerve endings of the pelvic floor muscles themselves, that have this huge load of supporting the weight of all the organs on top of them, and simultaneously contracting and relaxing a little bit every time you breathe, or relaxing a little bit more every time you go to the bathroom, and contracting after you go to keep everything inside, or relaxing a lot during childbirth, or relaxing or contracting super rapidly during orgasm. So like there's a reason why the pelvic floor and that area of the low belly is called the center of power. In many techniques, cultures, and even religious, is an extraordinary and utterly important area of the body. And that's why I commend you to restore your pelvic floor sensitivity and embody and welcome all the pleasure that you can experience there with the tools that I have just shared with you. And if you're ready for more, I invite you to come to Pelvic Floor Awakening. It's my 4-week online live course, and the doors for the summer cohort are open. So if you're ready to improve bladder control and increase intimate sensitivity, please do make this the summer that you bloom from within. So hit the link that is in the description of this episode and join us in Pelvic Floor Awakening now. Hope to see you there, and as always, remember to take the time to sense your fire all the way from the pelvic floor so you can then go on and share the flame.